Hello, everybody, and welcome to Office Hours. And for those of you here in America, happy 4th of July. Our Independence Day is today. We're going to have a fun show. As always, this is where you can submit questions about media and production 24/7. If you're watching on YouTube, you can use, let me get my mouse over there, this QR code that's popping up right now in the corner of the screen. That will take you into the system so that you can ask questions. We also have a kind of a more sophisticated backend, the Mukana system, that allows you not only to put in questions, but to vote on said questions. And this whole show is driven by your preferences. So if you have questions that you see as you read through the question queue that you like, vote them up. And that helps us determine what you want to talk about as the show goes on. All that said, right now it's time for your questions. So we're going to dive in. Alexander, what do our viewers and listeners have on their minds today?
Our first question this morning is from Paul Wallace in Hot Springs, Arkansas, asking, massive storm in the Gulf. How do you get alerts and protect your production business and home from damages from rain and high winds?
Hope you're safe, Paul. Let's talk to Nigel about it first. Nigel, what say you?
Well, of course, the number one thing you have to do is watch local news, which is 57% accurate about 33% of the time, but it's maybe the best source of information that you have. I think the reality is that, I live in Texas. We're probably not quite as in the zone as Houston or the coastline is, or even up Oklahoma. But there is a huge amount of awareness now, and we've noticed that the Austin people like to call our phones and inform us of things. Interestingly, even when we're out of the state, which is strange. But I think a lot of this comes back to the question of what type of events are you running? And of course, the more virtual your events, the more easy it is to keep them going. The more physical events, if you place them in the course of the storm, the more likely they are to get blown off. But a modern home, you should be really thinking about, if that's where your office or your production's from, how are you going to manage power, whether it's backup or conditioning or whatever it is. And it's a great time to understand some of the issues around those subjects.
Mark Giuliani.
So TV is one way. I'm not sure I could do all that math that Nigel was talking about, but the other way is radio. So you have FM radio, which is connected through the emergency broadcasting system, and AM radio. And AM radio, as everyone knows, is now trying to go through the Congress to keep it alive, but it takes so few radio stations with AM because their signal can reach so far that they can connect the whole country with something like 70 stations. So it's AM radio is good. You don't have to have the big TV going. You can just have the radio going in the background and get the emergency alerts. Also, we have our phones, as Nigel mentioned.
Yeah, phones have become big. Alex?
Insurance. At some point, we deal with this all the time here in California, but at some point there's, the elements are going to be more than you can protect. So make sure that you have a good insurance policy, make sure that you keep it up, make sure that you keep it connected, and make sure that you do all the things they ask you to do. Otherwise, they won't cover you.
Yeah, and if you still have power and the rest of that, and internet service, if the storm doesn't hit you directly, I've discovered that there are a lot of local alert systems you can plumb into smartphones so that you'll get a bing if there's something serious going on. Even communities like Nextdoor, that if you know your neighbors, they can be useful when something hits your specific area, because that is more localized than the national warnings. National warnings are great, and I appreciate everybody who works in the first responder and other emergency information systems, but stay connected and please stay safe. I hope this one misses you, Paul, and everybody else along the Gulf Coast escapes any massive damage from this one. Let's move on to our next question.
Mike Edwards in Brooklyn, New York asks, morning, everyone. I'm looking to purchase a series of eBooks from Amazon and convert them to PDFs. What program would the panel recommend I look at to do this? Thanks.
Alex, what's your preference?
So just want to lay out that most likely what you're doing is breaking a copyright. So just to kind of say that outright. As a result, I don't really know, because I just open up my Kindle stuff in my Kindle app. So I don't try to break them. But what I will say is that if I have bought a lot of products from a company called Wondershare, and so they have a breakdown here of how to do these things. So I'm not going to claim that I haven't done it and I don't know how to do it, but they said this is how to. This Caliber is one of them. that they've got a couple lists here of these, and this looks like a pretty solid set of instructions on how to do this. Zamzar. But if you can probably search Wondershare, convert Kindle book to PDF, and these are products that look like they can remove. There are definitely products out there that can remove the EPUB protection and allow you to save it as a PDF. But as I said, I generally just open it up in what it came in. So there are some good reasons to do it to PDF, and one of the reasons is that you can have it read to you more easily than what Kindle does. And there's, just to give you one little tip that's kind of weird. So if you buy a Kindle book and you put it on a Kindle reader, it'll read it to you. If you buy it on an iPhone, it won't read it to you, except if you ask the A word to play it for you, it will read it to you. So it's a really funny, like you have to have that service in your phone to get it to play Kindle out loud. It's a very, very odd way to do that.
Yeah, in setting up books for narration for me, I'm using a lot. I annotate, and it requires a PDF, and so I'm converting a good little bit. I think we've talked about them. There are a lot of programs that'll do that, rip and turn formats. And it's by the way, it's the audio playback that has me thinking about converting Kindle books to it. Is that there's tons of things that'll read your audio, read your PDFs, and so it's a weird thing because otherwise I have no real need. I feel like the Kindle reader is fine. I don't annotate things. I just look at things, and so it doesn't matter. So it hasn't bothered me until I really got to a point where, like for most things, books don't exist unless they exist in audio. Like if I see a book and it's not an audio book, I'm like, oh well, I guess that doesn't really exist. So I'm not going to read it. But I do get Kindles of certain things, and I have been, mostly I get cookbooks and how-to books and things with lots of pictures. Like that's what I buy for Kindle. Anyway, but there are a couple books that I have that have lots of words in them. And I have been thinking about ripping these to PDF because there's great PDF readers out there that you can choose any voice you want and speeds and everything else. So we'll, if you ask me that in another year, I might be an expert at it by then. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael asks, Sonarworks has SoundID VoiceAI, which brings AI voice manipulation into the DAW directly. Do you think that approach works better than ElevenLabs' approach?
Alexander Knight, what do you think?
I haven't tested it yet. I do generally find that Sonarworks products are very good. Of course, the musician part of me thinks that you should never use this kind of stuff. However, I acknowledge the creativity aspect of this. It might be useful if you're not a good singer. Like I can play the guitar, but I'm not a fantastic singer. So if I'm just trying to come up with ideas, like what would this song sound like if I had a singer that sounded like Rob Halford from Judas Priest or something like that. So I could see the value in that potentially. I'll have to test it to really see how well it works. So I can't really offer any more comparison to ElevenLabs than that because I haven't tried it. So,
Alex?
I think that we're really getting into an interesting time. I think this is really a spot to watch inside of the DAWs. And you're seeing some of this happening even in Logic and GarageBand where we can assist you. We can play your drums for you. We can play this for you. We can play. Is it going to be as good as a real artist that has real skill playing it? No. Is it going to be able to fill in a gap that you can't fill otherwise? Yes. And I think that you're going to see more and more. I mean, I think Apple in the past has really talked about more of machine learning and so on and so forth. But either way, you're going to see a lot of assistive technologies that can add things to what you're doing. And I think that they're going to be more and more integrated into these DAWs. It's a pretty interesting time to be watching this space.
I'm wondering often, just for my curiosity, what it's going to do to parodies, because it used to take somebody like Ali Yankovic to do a great parody. Now you can get backing tracks so easily, and then
it's not just backing tracks. You can have it right. I had it. Well, and when you think about parody, I mean, the parodies are fun and everything else. But there was a woman who was on TikTok, and she was doing ones about apostrophes and where they go and everything else for her classes, and they were hilarious. So we want to think, and we can think about, they're going to make it easier, but maybe we make music everywhere, in places that an average teacher could throw together a little jingle that has kids remember where their apostrophes are used and not used, or how to structure. It's the potentially the next generation of all the stuff we grew up with. Conjunction junction. So for those of us who are old enough, but teachers could be building those kinds of things using AI to write the lyrics, using AI to build the music, and again, this is building content that didn't exist because there was no viable market for it to be done. And so I think that we can look at the downside of it, and there is some downside to it, but there's a lot of creativity that is the upside of it that'll allow people to use these things for education and lots of other things like that.
Looking forward to the operatic aria about the M dash versus the N dash.
Exactly.
There's room there for somebody to come. Just next question.
Paul Wallace in Hot Springs, Arkansas asks, how do you decide when and if to upgrade your Ubiquiti Unifi network?
Guy Cochran. Guy.
Yeah, generally it's when you're expanding, when something new is coming online. Maybe some users want to use VoIP phones. That was one of the reasons why we switched over to some 48-port switches. We had to expand out, and you can get the little SFP modules and run those things like we had to run half a block away. So we were able to expand, and in that we were also able to upgrade our security cameras. So Ubiquiti has some crazy AI cameras that'll detect license plates and read them to you, and that you could sort by black cars that had that were SUVs. It's pretty fantastic. You should look at some of the videos online showing their new security cameras. So I'm on that route right now. I'm about ready to look at upgrading what that'll cost to switch over from my current. The other one is just users complaining. I mean, if you have a 1 gig network right now, I just upgraded to 2.5 gig, which is a lot cheaper than going to full 10 gig. And the little nicks are $20. So most of the users, they're not going to, even if you have a 10 gig connection, doing a 2.5 so much less expensive. And so those are a couple of reasons to upgrade a Ubiquiti network: speed, users complaining, expansion.
Thank you. Hope, Paul, that helped you. Let's go to the next question.
Someone named Alexander Knight is asking, is it possible to downgrade firmware on an ATEM Mini?
Ooh, you want to downshift. Alex.
You should be able to download whatever version you want. Now, what happens is there's a bunch of incremental updates, and at some point, they usually warn you in the update you can't go back because it's changing something in the firmware that's more permanent. So, but that doesn't happen at every upgrade, or it hasn't in the past. It may now. I mean, I don't know if they've just changed the way that they've updated it, but typically, if you uninstall what you have on your computer, you put the older version on, and then you run the update or install that older version. When it opens up in ATEM setup, it should say, "Oh, I got to reinstall," and it'll let you reinstall the older one again. And so I've definitely gone back in the past. I haven't done it. I will say I haven't gone backwards in maybe 2 or 3 years. So this information's a little old. And so, is there something wrong with your ATEM? Did the update break it?
I can't ISO record whatsoever right now. So ISO recording just doesn't work.
And that's in the newest.
I upgraded to 9.5, and then I also upgraded to 9.5.1, which also had another firmware update. And I'm working with Blackmagic on this, but the same drives. Now, I'm not using supported drives. I'm using my own NVMEs, which they don't recommend, and I fully acknowledge that. But they've been working fine for the last 12 months. But ever since I updated to it, so 50% of the time you'll start record, and in about 60 seconds or so, the record light starts flashing like crazy, and it stops. It's saying there's a problem with it. And if I reload if I change the XML profile, because I do different shows, sometimes when I reload the XML from another show, if I hit record, the record button doesn't even function. Like, I'll hit record on the actual switcher, and I'll do it in the control software. Hitting record does not even work. It won't record.
Yeah, I wonder if it became more sensitive to drive speed or something else.
That's
where
what I'm thinking. Something's changed.
Well, and I will say that I've had a lot of failures that are related to drive heat. So the drive gets hotter over a long record, and then it just stops in the middle for the ISO records. So I think that because what happens is, like, if you look at a T5, let's just, what a lot of people use, if you keep it running full tilt, like, so if you can capture a lot of ISOs and you keep that running, somewhere in about 45 minutes in, its bandwidth drops pretty dramatically. Like, it just goes zoom, and it just drops down, and it will kill your records. And so it could be something where they're taking the switcher is taking a more protective measure over, it's getting some of that data back from the drive, and it may be being more sensitive so that people, I have no idea what's happening here, but I'm just guessing. So shooting into the dark and just guessing what's happening is that Blackmagic may be becoming more stringent about what the drive, not so much what drive you're using, but what drive performance looks like, so that they can reduce the number of, failed records, which is actually very high on the ATEMs. Like that, failed records on the minis is a very high thing, but I think it's partially because they're letting you use any old drive you want. So I think that's the challenge. And you can definitely build NVMEs. I have NVMEs that I built, but they've got, some of them have big fans on them, like that are sucking through the veins and stuff like that to get sustained. So I don't know what yours looks like, but you might want to look at take a very large file or a set of large files and copy it to that drive and watch the drive speed and see if it stays that way through the entire drive. And if it drops down, it means at some point it's stopping down because it's too hot.
Jesse Kester, you want to get in on this?
I'm just wondering if there's a reason not to buy the cheapest approved drive that you can find online and test it with that first. It seems like you could get like a 500 gigabyte for $80 or something, and run that for an afternoon and see if it doesn't perform better.
Good suggestion. Alexander, you wanted to get back in?
Yeah, that's my next thing. It wasn't actually, so the thing is, I didn't even realize there was a compatibility list, and I've been using ATEM for a few years. So that's the next thing on my list. I'm ordering one of the LaCie recommended, the rugged SSDs, 2 terabytes. So I'll test it there and report back, because I got to get back to Blackmagic anyways. But yeah, I've been using my own. So these are Western Digital Black. They're high performance NVMEs, and then I am putting them in these Vantech NVMe enclosures, which have good heat dissipation. So the weird thing is I was testing, I actually formatted this in HFS journaled, which is what they recommend, a completely blank drive, and within the first minute it just stops. So there's something's changed. So I'll report back. I'll try one of the supported drives, and we'll see where it goes.
I was really shocked when we discovered that the T5s, which had been working beautifully, particularly for me on a Blackmagic 6K and a sled, when I tried a T7, there were all sorts of problems. I know Alex went down that path, and there was something in the firmware or something that broke that success. And it just reminds me that there's a lot of finicky little things in terms of I/O and interface and things like that going into these high-speed SSDs, and sometimes it's hard to figure these problems out. So good luck. Our fingers are crossed for you, Alexander. Next question.
Chuck Hodges in Tuolumne, California asks, and this is from the QR code, it's the week of Canada Day and Independence Day. What's your best recipe to celebrate these holidays, and why? How is media and streaming production affected by this kind of dish, or is it just another soup du jour these days?
Alex Lindsay, you want to start us off, and your thoughts?
I used to celebrate, I grew up, and 4th of July was a pretty big deal because I grew up in a big family. We all lived pretty close to each other. So typically 4th of July was a couple hundred people. It included hay, because we grew up on a farm. There were hay wagon rides and 3-legged races and kids swimming in the pond, which is, I look back on swimming in the pond. And I was telling somebody, they were like, do you worry about, there was a little bit of
test
algae.
The water first.
I was like, learning a little algae. I was like, algae. We used to pick it up. It was so thick you could pick it up and throw it at each other. That was like a sport. It was like if you hit someone in the head just right, it would turn into like a wig, and so like it's just a completely different thing. And we had, you couldn't buy a lot of fireworks, but people would build them, so it was an exciting time. So I think that we had but when I left home, went into the city and lived in cities for the last 25 years. It's not nearly as fun. so like I'm just kind of like I've gotten to the point where like I think we're going to go out for fireworks tonight to down to the thing. But that's about the extent. I've got a lot of things to get done. I actually have meetings today, and like it's kind of like meh. Like so I'll probably go into the pool sometime this afternoon. That's about it. And now I guess the question is, I think that Alex is our one Canadian. Is there much of a celebration for Canada Day?
It's pretty big, but I kind of just avoid all the celebrations. I'm not a huge fan of fireworks and noise. So,
there you go.
Yes, it is. Absolutely.
When I was growing up, I was a huge fan of fireworks and noise.
Me too, and a frustrated one. Growing up in Phoenix, we were disallowed because it's so dry there that there were a lot of fireworks-related fires, so they shut down most fireworks for most of my youth, above the class of like bottle rockets. And then I worked for a brief period of time in Texas, and the fireworks stands were everywhere, and I went a little overboard.
We had... I'll tell one story that I don't think I've told before, which is that we had in one 4th of July, my cousins drove from Arizona to our house, and they went through Missouri, and Missouri had almost no laws about fireworks. Mm-hmm. And so they bought everything, Roman candles and bottle rockets and, everything you could, M80s and everything else. And so for a couple of days before 4th of July, we did anyway. So but on the day of the 4th of July, we filled up the little sandbox. It's probably like 5 feet by 5 feet, but we had all the stuff that we were going to use to set it off for the families. The family all got out in the backyard, and we're all getting excited. And I live in the middle. I grew up in the middle of nowhere. The backyard was 4 acres. So when you think about it, it's not like there's no other. You can't see another house. Like you can see horses off in the distance. And so anyway, so we went to do this, and someone said something to my cousin, and he turned, and the Roman candle we just seen the Roman candle go into the sandbox, and then it was just everywhere. I mean, it was like there were bottle rockets and Roman candles and everything else. Just everyone was running for cover, but it was just fireworks everywhere. But it all went off in about 4 or 5 minutes. Everything had gone off, but it was mass chaos for a little while, So it was. But what's funny was it was terrorizing when it happened, but it was still my best fireworks experience ever.
You don't search on YouTube for garage fireworks accident. Yeah. People buy hundreds and hundreds of dollars of fireworks and put them in their garage.
I'm always hoping that we get the San Diego treatment. Like the San Diego treatment is the one that every time I go to a fireworks, all I want to see is that. Like it's funny. It's
hold on for the second hour.
Okay, yeah.
we will definitely touch on that. Yes, absolutely. So it's just one of those things. You're either a fireworks kind of person, and as a kid, I just loved them because they were forbidden fruit. We'd have to go down to Nogales to Mexico to get the really good fireworks, get out of the country. But we would occasionally do that when we got into our young 20s and have bottle rocket wars and things like that. It was stupidly unsafe. Please do not mess around with these things. They literally can cause all sorts of disasters that are permanent, but doesn't mean people don't do it. So happy 4th of July in the United States. Happy Canada Day. And for everybody else celebrating anything, happy weekend. Let's move on to our next question.
Jesse Kester here in the panel from Glendale asks, what alternatives would you suggest for someone who wants an action cam but doesn't want a GoPro?
Alex, what do you think?
Yeah, I think I'd probably go if I don't do a lot of action cams, mostly because the sensors are smaller than I want and so on and so forth. But if I was going to do one right now, I'd probably go with the Osmo Action 4. So if you're looking for a real action cam that's single direction, the Osmo 4 is I've talked to a couple of folks that really like this one. You can also, Sony has some higher performance cameras that are a little bit more expensive. And then, it's like the 01 or something like that's out there. And then the Insta360 obviously has a bunch of 360s that you can then pan and scan inside of. So, it depends on what you're trying to do, but some of the higher end Insta360s are another thing to look at.
There you go. Next question.
Next one's for me. Any suggestions for dedicated ProRes capable recorders with HDMI input under $1,000? Atomos Ninja 5 is one option I was looking at, open to others.
Guy Cochran's going to start us off. Guy?
Atoms are great if you're needing to do portable recording. So those are more like field recorders. But if you want something more for the studio, the Blackmagic line of the HyperDecks are worth looking into. I would really look at the workflow and think about stepping up, because sitting in front of me, I have the HyperDeck Studio Pro, which looks like this. And this gives you 2 SSDs. You also have SD cards here. The other great thing that is nice about this is in the back, you'll see that you have 10 gig Ethernet, and you also have the ability to plug in an external disk. So you can add a USB-C disk, and you could put a really big disk. If you do that, I recommend putting an NVMe cache inside of it, which that's the other thing that they just announced during this last announcement, is that inside of this is a spot where you can put an NVMe, a little drive, and that way you can record directly to it, and then you can dump the cache to an external disk, or if the disk is fast enough, it'll go ahead and take it. The other thing is with this 10G Ethernet, you can transfer your files without having to touch them. So if you just have a program like a CyberDuck, you can just open it up and inside of your HyperDeck files, and then with a 10 gig connection, like this is a 2.6 gig file, it would just transfer super fast. So think about that entire ecosystem and that entire workflow. What are you storing to? How long are the files? And then how are you picking them up? And do you really want to handle the media, like having to physically sneaker net them around?
Jesse Kester.
We picked up the Atomos Ninja Assassin when it first released and have never looked back. We take it on every field shoot, and I disagree a little bit, Guy. We use it in the studio all the time. In fact, I'm using it right now as a second monitor, and it's nice that it's smaller because we don't always, need a full-blown monitor. Sometimes we just need something to check in and make sure that the picture is clear. Highly recommend the Ninja Assassin line, or the Atomos line of products.
And Alex Lindsay.
And remember that there are the HyperDeck shuttle, or the shuttle and the minis out there that are considerably less than $1,000. I have a little bit of all of those things. So the things that we record that are the most important typically are recorded on the HyperDeck studios. We still have some of the older studios that have analog ins, which we really like because we can put reference audio into all of them. So we like those, but we do have a bunch of the new ones too. I think we have 8 of the studios, the newer studios out there. They have better. The one problem if you decide to go used is that the older studios have heat issues. So you really can't stack more than 2 per together, and then you need a gap if you're going to put them into a rack, and usually put fans in those gaps. so anyway, to keep them, they got better at heat dissipation, but that was one of the problems with them. People who stack HyperDecks together will always tell you how unstable they are. People who spread HyperDecks out always tell you how reliable they are. So it's really a heat problem that we learned over time. But for a lot of the stuff, like, hey, we're gonna record the program and the clean, and we might record that on the HyperDeck Studios because that's what we're delivering. But the client hasn't asked for all the ISOs, but we're going to record them just in case. That's where we would have a whole bunch of these HyperDeck minis that are 3 per U, so we can stack them together very tightly, and they're not very expensive, and you just throw a bunch of SD cards in, and they will record ProRes as well. The other advantage that the HyperDeck minis have is that they do key fill out for the older ones. I think that's only the Plus now, the HyperDeck HD Plus or whatever, are the ones that will do key fill out, which I don't think that the full-size HyperDecks will do. Maybe the new ones will. The older ones didn't do that. The shuttle will also record it. Like I have a shuttle in my inline, so my program that you're seeing goes through my shuttle. so I can just hit record and start recording whatever I'm working on, and then then it's in the shuttle. So that's another way to do it.
Guy Cochran wanted to come back in. Guy?
Yeah, one other thing to consider is just Memo Live. If you already have a Mac that's sitting around, Memo Live with a drive will work awesome. Another thing to consider is these older AJ Key Pros can be had for about $150 to $250, and then you add a couple of the key store drives. And if you don't need the high frame rate stuff of the modern era, then these things can be had for a song. I bought 5 of them on eBay for $1,400 shipped, and it's a deal. Then I've got 4 ISOs and program, so that works for me.
Jesse wanted to come back too. Jesse?
If you end up going with something like a Ninja Assassin, please do remember to buy a cage for it. The mounting points are not sufficient on the base unit.
Great intelligence. Thank you. Next question.
Paul Wallace in Hot Springs, Arkansas asks, would you upgrade to an iPhone 15 Pro or above to get Apple Intelligence features?
Nigel, what say you?
So if you're asking me specifically, the answer is yes. If you're asking, will the rest of the world, I think that's a more interesting question. And the reality is, I don't think the rest of the world will likely do it just to get the intelligence features. They'll do it because they're on a 3 or 4 year cycle, and the 16 versus the 12, 13 is going to make that a super cycle for Apple. So I think Apple stands the chance of actually being really lucky that it will have some technologies that will drive some people. But I think more importantly in this sort of market is where are they in the cycle, and that compares to the 12s and the 13s as people get to 2 or 3, 4 years with the devices. The improvements in the camera and the other features will probably give them the upgrades, and they'll get the benefits of the intelligence, the AI, rather than that driving the specific purchase, I suspect.
Alex Lindsay.
Yeah, I agree. I think that this year is a super cycle for Apple. So they're probably going to sell more iPhones than they've ever sold before. So because there's a lot of folks with older phones that are going to want to be part of that mix, and I think that you are going to see a lot of Apple intelligence features. If I had a 14, if I really thought I wanted to use the AI stuff, then I might jump into it. The real advantage of jumping into and you should, if you can afford it, you should always get the Pros because they have so much extra stuff. They last a lot longer than the regular ones because they just have feature sets that keep moving forward. I think I'd feel pretty bad if I bought the 15 and not the 15 Pro because there's a lot of things that aren't there. If you have the 14 Pro, I think it's pretty hard to decide whether you really want to go. You could probably wait another year if there's nothing you're missing from the 15 right now. And go for the 17, which will always be better than the 16. If I had something before the 14, I would probably start thinking hard about whether this is the year to upgrade into something new.
I was considering an upgrade. I'm on a 14 Pro, and I was thinking very seriously about going to a 15. And then I read an article about the fabs and what Apple is doing with the 3 nanometer process, not Apple TMC really. And I guess they've re-architected a lot of the chip for the new coming out process. And it was a big deal for those foundries to make this new switch into the new 3 nanometer process that is going to debut, I believe, with the 16. So that kind of pushed me into saying I can live with my 15 Pro for a while or the 14 Pro for a while, let this generation go by and see if what everybody is writing about in the semiconductor news space is true, and that there really are some additional features coming up next cycle.
And remember that you may not see most of the AI features until the middle of next year. So if you bought a 16 right now, I wouldn't buy it for the AI tools. I would buy it for the other things. Like for instance, for me, I really want to capture spatial. So for me, it's an obvious, I'm expecting the 16 to be able to do 4K dual eye outputs, streaming and records. And so I'm waiting for that. And if that happens, and for me, I don't buy things based on AI, I buy them on the camera. So I just sit there and wait for Apple to talk about the camera. And then that's when I decide whether I'm upgrading or not. If it's not a good camera update, then usually I wait another year.
Nigel, you wanted to come back in?
Yeah, and I'd be a little careful of falling for the 3 nanometer thing. What they are and what they call them aren't always the same thing. And I think that the marginal improvement between 5 or 5 plus and 3 is such that if you're fairly near the leading edge, you really won't notice much of a difference. If you're 3 or 4 behind, you'll be dramatic. None of these upgrades of silicon are going to give us the jump that we saw between Intel and, the A series processors until they do something dramatically different to the architecture by stacking the memory and stuff in a significantly different way.
I'm not a hardware guy, so I'm not sure. So you may be right. We'll see. It'll be out before too long. Normally there's a pretty regular upgrade cycle, so we'll see the benchmarks of the 16 Pro chips and see if they compare. But it's amazing what they all do. Let's go to the next question.
Michael Dickman in Munich, Germany, and this is from the QR code, asks, Jeff mentioned that he had a script to start an NDI discovery server in AWS. Could you post an example, please, at Discord? I would like to train myself in understanding how to use scripts to start and configure small Linux and later AWS Nice DCV instances.
Guy Cochran, can you help him out?
Yeah, in AWS, there's something called Cloud Formation, and it looks like this. And this is what the back end of AWS looks like to create these. And you would basically create a stack, and you would load in that script. We have one for the Discovery server. Let me see if Jonas and Churig, the guys that wrote them, will go ahead and release those for public consumption. I think that they'd be fine with it. But we also use Cloud Formation in a much more advanced way to build our vMix instances and our Zoom drone and Zoom Room instances. So we have specific cloud formations that'll not only install software, but it'll also turn on certain settings, camera privacy setting to what it needs to be at for certain build, and VB audio cable and all these other little apps that we need to wire everything together. So once you get rolling with it, it's pretty cool. So I'll jump into, hit me up in Discord, and I will see if Jonas and Churig are cool with releasing those to the group.
It's so cool. This community is just so helpful. Alex, you had a thought.
And Michael, Jonas in the chat said, I sent you a link in Discord.
There you go.
Whoa,
the magic of
like
real time.
And if you're watching
expertise.
this and you're like, what is Discord and what is he talking about? You can go to officehours.global/join. You'll start getting an email. And in that email, hidden in there, is ways to get into things like Makana and Discord.
There you go. And regardless, thank you for being here, Michael. And let's go to the next question.
From the QR code, Gene J. Anthony in Skokie, Illinois asks, our Aircon 2 is not communicating to all 6 Frees Tri6 fixtures. What's going on? Please help.
Alex, can you help?
I can't help. But the question led to lots of really cool things. So, I don't have any idea because I can't find in Aircon 2. All I can find in Aircon 2 is a sensor that senses the air, which I guess talks to air conditioners, like industrial size air conditioners, to tell them what to do, which I didn't know existed. I was today's years old that I knew that thing existed. So I thought that was cool. And then I tried to find out what the Tri6 fixtures are, and I don't know if this is what he's talking about, but they're really cool. So anyway, so look at these things. So these are battery operated, and this may not be, he may be like, I wasn't talking about this at all, but you asked the question without enough detail. So here's what you get.
Is that a grill?
So anyway,
what is that?
This is a light. This is a Chevet light, all right? But it's battery operated, and you can see the mount here, and you can like attach it to stuff. So if you're out somewhere where you can't get power to it, you can put these. Look at these little. It's so.
Oh, how cute!
It's so cute.
Awesome.
It's got DMX channels. It's got, But if you couldn't run power out there. I don't know how long it lasts. But anyway, I felt like the question was worth covering because at first I thought it was about air conditioning, and then I was like, oh, but it's about
theatrical
lights.
lighting. Very cool.
Yeah,
that's battery operated, huh? Wow.
Battery operated lights. Anyway,
wow.
I'm sorry I couldn't answer your question. Those things didn't connect together. But they were cool individually by themselves. So there you go.
And that's another thing that's cool about being a panelist on Office Hours is you sit here and people bring these ideas and things that we hadn't heard of before. It's fabulous.
Maybe Nigel has figured this out.
Nigel, did you figure it out?
I hadn't, but I wanted to distract Alex with another gadget he needs. There's a thing called a UHOO, which is UHOO, and it's about a couple $100, and it'll monitor all the air in your house and give you ongoing data about everything from the pressure to the molecules. So if you want to find your way to really know whether your house is clean living, particularly, by the way, if you have kids that have sensitivity to these things, this is the $300 you need to spend.
That sounds really good. So Yoo-hoo to me is like a chocolate drink that we grew up with that you should not drink.
Well, it was chocolate-ish, chocolate flavor. I'm not sure there's any real chocolate in it.
It was so good. It was so good. I probably I had a friend that had them, and I only had them about once a year, but it was always like, oh, Yoo-hoo. Anyway, yeah. So the Yoo-hoo, it's YOUHOO.
No, UHOO.
Oh, okay.
So just the letter capital U, H.
Does it do temperature as well?
Yeah. And it'll do different molecules, and it'll track it for you on your iPhone. And
Dagnabbit, you're an expensive friend. That's all I got to say. All right.
We're an expensive show. Anyway, moving on. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael asks, I've seen some anecdotes that people have run Dante networks using Unify switches with no issues. However, some people here say not to use Dante with Unify. What's the verdict?
Guy Cochran's going to help us out here. Guy?
Well, it depends on how it's configured. I know some people that with some pretty big systems that are running all Unify might want to look at VLANing it out so that it's on its own VLAN. So I know some people will run both on the same, but those are guys with Netgears. So it just depends on if you know how to properly configure things. So I would go VLAN it out, and I wouldn't worry about it.
Alex, follow.
Mickey says that it might be fine if you have a very small network and keep Dante clients on a single switch. Otherwise, save your time and money and go to a known good solution.
There you go. Next question.
Robert Tremblay in Montreal, Quebec, and this is from the QR code. Hello, Office Hours. With NDI 6, I'm having a few problems. Trying to revert back to NDI 5.61 for Mac, but I can't find a download link to previous versions. Anyone got a link for legacy versions of NDI? Thanks.
Guy Cochran's going to help you out, Guy.
Yeah, I'd love to hear what the issues are because we're running 6 and it seems pretty stable. So I can look through some of my old download folders and I'm sure I have it. So hit me up on Discord and I'm sure I can send that over to you if you'd like.
There you go. Next question.
Ignacio Madero in Madrid asks, Jonas, I have noticed that when sending and receiving SRT through a Peplink router, it is easier to use cellular as a WAN connection, so I don't have to deal with the venue's firewall. I haven't been able to do it through Speedfusion, though. Any tips? And that's a QR code question.
And Guy Cochran's going to help you out again.
I'm going to phone a friend here, and Jonas says, ask it again on Friday. So he's going to be on Friday.
Jonas will be our
I wasn't sure.
I
I brought it up to make sure that I didn't know whether Jonas is going to be on Friday. When you watch the show, like every day, we're like, who's going to show up today? So if Jonas, now we know Jonas will be here tomorrow, which is a warning for all of you to build up all your IT questions and be ready to throw them at Jonas on.
Yeah,
there's a little more to it. It says it sounds like he wants to receive it. For that, he needs to set up port forwarding on Fusion Hub of a port and make sure he allows UDP for it. We use an SRT gateway in the cloud, so both ends can be callers, which would solve it.
Okay, so there is a solution out there, and tomorrow it would be a good time to bring this kind of question back, and Jonas will be here all day long on the show. All show long. I shouldn't say all day long. That's committing him to something he doesn't do. Let's go to the next question.
Robin Cutshaw in Atlanta, Georgia asks, do you do macOS image backups? Trying to decide between Super Duper and Carbon Copy Cloner for the new Mini.
Alexander, what's your strategy here?
I used to use Super Duper years ago, and it was always great. Carbon Copy Cloner is pretty good too, but I find these days I just don't see the need of it. Takes more time to restore from a backup, and with everything being in the cloud nowadays, at least for me, I have a lot of stuff in iCloud Drive. I don't keep massive files in iCloud Drive, but a lot of documents and small files that are very useful to have. And of course, app data that gets synced to iCloud. So I just find that these days it's much faster for me to just reinstall macOS and it'll automatically pull down my important stuff from iCloud Drive and I'll just install my apps again. So I haven't done that in a long time. And I suspect a lot of people are probably not using those kind of apps anymore, but your mileage may vary.
Alex.
So the only time we used to do it a lot, I haven't done it as much recently because we don't do this as much, but I used to have a pretty large fleet of Macs. So we probably had about 40 of them, 40 Macs that were, and they would go out into production, and we wanted them to always go out in production. About 20 of them, we always wanted to go out in production in the same state. So basically, we would get everything installed the way we want it, and then we would make a car. I think we were using Super Duper. And then what we would do is every time it came back into the warehouse, it would just get flashed. And so we just flash it, and so that got rid of, we had to warn people, like, don't save your files because everything's going to get removed and a clean version is going to get put onto it. And we found that was the best way to make sure that we had a known state. And if we wanted something new, someone had to make the argument that we're going to make it new and then make another dupe and then make another whatever. But otherwise, you always ended up with a computer that was exactly the same as the last time you went out. So I think that's where it becomes useful. As far as backing it up, I don't do that. I try to keep most of my files on an external file server. I try to keep my apps on there, and I reinstall everything. I usually on a major update, not a dot release, but a major release, I will tend to strip the whole computer down and put everything back on it. And it's like a once a year spring cleaning, of the computer. And everything runs a lot better if you do that.
Alexander, you want to come back in?
I just want to say that Robin in the chat was actually saying he wants to test the new beta of macOS. So that would be a good reason to clone your whole drive. If you don't have a separate computer to test it on, then yes, cloning your whole drive to be able to restore is always a good idea.
Don't do that yet. Don't go there. It's too early. It's too early. Get another computer and test it on it. Just get another Mac Mini or something like that. Do not use your computer right now. If you needed to get work done, that's not where you put a July beta. Like a July beta, even public beta. It's not what you put your work stuff on. If something happens to you, it's really on your own head. But I would not put it on any computer that matters in July. Maybe September, but not July.
Nigel?
Yeah, I have the beta running on a separate machine. I will tell you that it is very, very early on, as Alex said, that most of what they talked about is not there. They're really just testing the main pipes and plumbing at this point. The only feature that I played with is quite funny is the share my iPhone feature, but most of the infrastructure is in place. Most of the features that you want may not be. Now, if you just want to test it with that infrastructure, you could do that. But the variance in capability in the betas at the moment is that maximum amplitude of whatever it is, it changes a lot between the next 2 or 3. I think you're 2 or 3 off really a testable platform.
And the other strategy that I've still used, I don't do it as often as I should, but the time machine backups that are built into the Apple OS in conjunction with having an iCloud account really makes migration particularly a lot easier. The last couple of times I've had to back up my current state of the computer, I just time machine it. And then in the case of a laptop that I was using in the voice booth, and my wife actually needed access to it, so we used the time machine backup to kind of re-image that. Worked fine, and the advantage is that that's kind of controlled by Apple, and they're not going to let anything in there that's going to be other than what I would want. So that's another strategy if you want to think about using iCloud as a kind of a repository of your system state. Let's go to the next question.
Jonas Daltel in Stuttgart asks, has anyone found or used the built-in website of the ATEM now? If you go to /admin, you can change settings directly.
Alex.
What?
Yeah. That kind of surprised me.
Yeah, I tried it. It's a great call out. Okay, so here it is. This is the webpage. So if you go, I went to my, my local IP for my switcher and went to just /admin, and you end up with this. Now, I can't update anything. I don't know exactly why. By the way, you can see as a note, see my button brightness is set to 1%. I highly recommend it. I don't even know what, anyway. It has your settings in there. Interesting. I can't update anything here, but I can get to it and I can format a drive. I had no idea that this was here. So
there's a built-in website on the switcher.
It may be kind of it feels like a hello world, like they have a page up there that they thought might be a good idea. I don't know how long it's been there. Maybe this version. I've never heard of that before until Jonas brought it up. So thanks, Jonas. Maybe if you have more tips and tricks, let us know. I am kind of interested in being able to call a lot of things out to the ATEM, programmatically, because it has it's not as open as we'd like it to be, but it does have an API that we can call to, and I think it's relatively simple in that area. So anyway, it's very interesting.
Let's go to the next question.
Next one's for me. What are the odds we'll see a refreshed ATEM Mini line later this year?
Jesse Kester is going to start us off. Jesse?
Oh boy, I don't trust Grant Petty not to release anything at this point.
You think he may have something in the hopper that's too compelling. Nigel, what are your thoughts?
I think there are sort of three things to look at. First of all, is this the time of year they do that? And we know NAB is a very popular time for updating products. Doesn't mean they can't, as Jesse says, do something randomly before Christmas or before the holiday season. But you got to think of the time of the year. Second thing you got to think about is, are there compelling features? that they need for a product extension strategy? What are they missing that is starting to slow down sales? Is it, IP-based communication? Is it 4K? What is it? And it's not clear to me that in the Mini line there's any of that, particularly that they're dying for. I think the third thing is, what's the life of the product? So the Mini Extreme was announced February 21, I think I saw when I looked it up, which means it's 3 years old, which means they're getting to the point that the components or parts they have are either going to get difficult or might be needing change. So what you might see, and I suspect next year will be the time to see it, is a rev of the product because they need to change the components or update them and stuff. So you've really got, in my mind, you've got those three things. And when I look at those three things, it's hard for me to see there's a driving force this year, but I would expect something next year. And I know
Alex
nothing,
Lindsay.
by the way.
Excuse me, Nigel. Alex Lindsay.
If I'm correct, I actually believe the Mini line and some of the components around it were released at IBC or announced at IBC, if I remember correctly. So there could be a TikTok that they do here where the bigger stuff is released in NAB, and then the more consumer stuff is released or the less professional stuff is released at IBC. I don't know if people at IBC prefer that, but if they're going to release it, my guess is they would the two windows for them to release it would be at IBC in September or NAB New York in October. And I know what's really interesting is that Blackmagic's a big proponent of these conferences, so they. As much as they like to go to these conferences, they really like to support the conferences. They feel that if you talk to some folks there, they really feel like these conferences are very important to the ecosystem. And so a lot of times they may be breaking up these announcements to make sure that all these conferences, or the ones that they go to, are successful. So it's really interesting to see that they've been kind of a good steward of the industry itself. In 2020, when everything was closed, 2021, I guess, when everything was closed and almost nobody went to NAB, Blackmagic took out a massive, booth. And I don't think that was there to make money. I think it was there to make sure that NAB had the revenue that they needed to do that, and Blackmagic could afford to do that. So I think you may see some releases in the September and October events. And I think it has more to do with Blackmagic paying attention to the industry and making sure that these things can continue than it has to do with what their TikTok looks like. I do think that there are some things I'd love to see them add. I mean, the primary thing is balanced inputs. Like I just think, the things that we could see with a Mini is, number one is balanced inputs. Number two is Ethernet, all Ethernet, like just. It could be a Mini with one connector. It could be a Mini with 4 connectors. It could be whatever, but it's just all Ethernet into the Mini, and I think that would take their line to the next step. So I think that those are the things that, and then I think there was something else in my head, and then just less buttons. Like take less buttons. Like it's just like I don't need all these buttons. Like I feel like they put out that little controller for their bigger things that are like the tiny controller, and I was like, okay, now you figured out that we don't need all these buttons anyway. So, but yeah, there you go.
Let's go to the next question.
Robin Kutcha in Atlanta, Georgia asks, Loopback has a new release that seems stable on Sonoma. I'm trying to decide whether to upgrade my primary AV Mac Mini to it. Thoughts?
Alexander, what do you think?
I don't know what version of macOS you're currently running, but generally staying a couple versions behind is always a good idea unless there's a specific need to go to it. Now, what I'm finding is that there seems to be more and more app developers that are getting more aggressive about dropping support for older operating systems, and they seem to, and Blackmagic is one of these companies where they don't really want to support anything older than about 2 versions behind, most likely because they're taking advantage of the latest frameworks and APIs in macOS. So that's one thing to keep in mind. I recently moved my main computer to Sonoma and it's fine, but I only did that after waiting almost a year and making sure that all my pro apps, including all my plugins, are 100% qualified and stable and supported by those manufacturers. So Pro Tools and all the plugins that I use. So I would check every single app, make a list of everything that you're using, and really be careful about moving.
Alex?
Yeah, the 2.4.0 release was a disaster. The 2.4.1 seems to have stabilized everything. I'd probably give it another couple weeks. Just let us all use it in our systems. And I'm using it. I'll be doing a record with it tomorrow. But 2.4.0 basically made loopback and everything connected to it not useful. I mean, it was crackly or not coming through at all. And the 2.4.1 seems to have fixed all of those things. But we're still testing, and that just came out, I think, earlier this week or late last week. So I would give it another week or two before I moved.
Let's go to the next question.
Jonas Daltel in Stuttgart asks, in the second hour, if there are optional prepared slides and explanations, should they just be posted as questions so that the community can decide if they want them?
Alex.
Probably more of a Sunday question. So we'll talk about it more on Sunday for that question specifically. But I would say if they have more than 5 words, we probably should think about whether we want them in there or not.
There you go. Simple answer. Let's go to the next question.
Douglas Carmichael asks, I'm eagerly awaiting Sequoia, but my Yamaha DM3 mixer requires a specific driver for USB audio. Would I still be able to download Sonoma if I update to Sequoia and the Yamaha driver doesn't work?
Chassis Kester.
Yes, you can go back on a Macintosh. You go to the App Store, and right now I'm looking at downloading Ventura, which is one version before Sonoma. The trick with this is that you have to be ready to wipe your hard drive completely, and that's like a full-level format with no data on it before you do a backlogged install. But you should be ready to do a full hard drive wipe anytime you move operating systems anyway.
And I mentioned Time Machine. The last time I had to do that was a few years ago, but I was able to use a previous Time Machine. It's one of its cute little interface things. You just go back in time and re-image from an older version of things. And I was able to back down one successfully that way pretty easily. I mean, it took a long time. It takes a good little bit of time to do a complete reboot from a Time Machine backup. But the system is built to do that, and it's pretty simple and pretty self-explanatory. Let's go to the next question.
Gordon Lake in Los Angeles, California asks, the latest ATEM update allows for Zoom ISO to ATEM ISO to DaVinci and back into Zoom. This seems like a great way to train over Zoom as it allows for instant playback. Is this the best workflow?
Alex Lindsay, what do you think?
I hadn't thought of that. like I hadn't thought of going out to Resolve. I would typically one of the reasons that I'm doing this funny thing with my and I'm just starting to get it working, which is this HyperDeck shuttle, is to do something like that where my program output is going out to that, and then I can cut to it. And I'm doing it slightly differently in the sense that I can take any screen and just put it on cut to it, and then record as it comes in to make that actually happen. But I haven't really thought about using Resolve for that. When you say the best workflow, I probably would say no. Is it a workflow that might work? And then I would say yes. But I am getting the Resolve workflow kind of working, this replay system. I have to admit, I don't really understand it, and I don't really understand why it was done. But I'm dedicated sometime in July, I'm going to have it working, figure out this replay thing. But to me, it just seems like I don't understand why Resolve is doing replays. It just seems like such a weird, convoluted thing to do, but maybe it'll work great. So we're gonna try to play with it a little bit and see.
It's always scary when you say the words, is this the best? And then follow it with anything, because we're
EVS. EVS is the best. You didn't say for the price. So if you want the best playback for your Zoom when you're doing training, you just get an EVS, put it next to you, and just make sure you got Genlock.
And I think we can sneak one more in.
Next question is from Paul Wallace in Hot Springs, Arkansas. How do you set up port forwarding on a Ubiquiti Unifi Dream Machine SE?
Kai?
See if I can do this in 30 seconds or less. You basically go down to the left to this bottom settings cogwheel, go to the security tab, go to the port settings or port forwarding tab, and then down here where it says create entry, you'd create an entry, and then basically you're saying what port that you want to open, name it like I have NDI bridge, going to 5990, and then it's going to this machine 192.168.8.47, and you just then enable it. You would click forward the rule and apply the changes, and that's it.
When I saw Guy's name, I said, he can do this, and absolutely did. Well done, Guy. Thank you. It is the end of our first hour, which means that a few little notifications. Tomorrow, Tuesday, we're talking, or not Tuesday, tomorrow, Friday, we're talking WebRTC for broadcast and live streaming. And as you were hearing during the discussion, Jonas will be here to explain how WIP has significantly contributed to the adoption of use of WebRTC in our industry. And so he's going to be here to ask questions. He also has a primer article. If you go to the show notes, look for that link. And if you want to read up before, that'll give you even more good questions to ask. Both Saturday and Sunday shows, as you know, are live but not recorded. Yes, we answer your questions 7 days a week. So that means that both Saturday and Sunday you can ask your regular questions. But they do have a bit looser feel to our weekend shows. So if you want to kind of relax and do some of that, add your questions. We'll be right back with a look at HDR